Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Sukhvinder Singh Surdi and I am a junior press officer with the Sikh Press Association. Firstly, I would like to thank all of you for coming tonight. I know this week especially has been very busy for Sangat, especially with the case of Jagtar Singh Johar in India. Just like to say that our thoughts are with the campaign. Please do support the campaign. Sikh Press Association have been busy providing that interface between the Sikh community, the Free Jaggi Now campaign and the mainstream media, and we ask everybody to get involved in whatever way they can to help free Veerji in India. So for those of you who don't know, the Sikh Press Association is a project of Everything's 13, and Everything's 13 has other projects such as Basics of Sikhi, Kiddie Sangat and Mighty Khalsa. And what we do is we provide an interface between the mainstream media and the Sikh community. For those of you who don't know also, we are entirely funded by Sangat donations. Our founder, the late Jagraj Singh, believed that the best way to use Sangat money was to invest in people who could serve the Panth. And with that in mind, I ask you to please donate tonight, because although investing in people is good, hiring at this venue, for example, cost us £800, and it's only with your donations that we can carry on funding these sorts of events. Just some housekeeping. We have to be out of here by 9 p.m. tonight. We have to vacate this room by 9 p.m. So we're aiming to get wrapped up about 8:45 at the latest. Also, there are no planned fire drills. So in the event that you hear the fire alarm, please make your way through here, which is the nearest fire exit. Something that we wanted to do at Sikh Press Association is to give the Sikh community the forum to discuss issues amongst ourselves, because all too often we encounter in our work stories in the mainstream media about the Sikh community that don't involve the Sikh community. The articles or the stories, they don't hear from members of the Sikh community, and they don't feature people who work in our community day in, day out. It is our job to represent the community, and to do so we want to put everybody forward and to ensure that we can have an open discussion about different topics in our community so that we can represent the Sikh community as best as we can. Lastly, please do follow us on social media. This is being streamed live on Facebook, so you don't need to stream it yourselves. But if you would like to comment on, say, Twitter or Facebook, then the hashtag for this event is hashtag Sikh Mental Health. With that, we'll get started. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
My name is Jasveer Singh. I'm with the Sikh Press Association. I'll be hosting tonight. We will get straight onto our questions. Before we do, I'm just going to quickly introduce the panel. From my left, we have Sandeep Kaur. She's a family therapy associate. We have Harpal Singh, who's a psychotherapist. Baljit Singh is a educator of the Sikh faith for Basics of Sikhi. We've got Dr. Ravjot Kaur, who's a psychiatrist, and we've got Banji Jaspal Kaur, who's a psychiatric nurse, also does art for therapy training. And we've got Gajan Singh, who's a Sevadar of the Sikh Helpline, one of the most prominent organizations when it comes to dealing with mental health issues within the Sikh community. So cracking on with our very first question, how do we deal with mental health issues when there is no Punjabi word for depression? Again, how do we deal with mental health issues when there is no Punjabi word for depression? The first person that I'd like to address this question would be Harpal Singh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. How do we deal with mental health issues in Sikhism? Very much different to how other communities will deal with it. We tend to probably work more based on hearsay, what other people do, keep it in-house, keep it in culture, deal with it probably more likely to go to a Baba than to go to someone who's a professional. Probably be able to actually keep it in-house, keep it knit, and probably use the word denial quite a lot. It's quite a lot of people will actually just be in denial of it rather than wanting to address it or be open to address it. You get loads of stigmas about neighbours, people in the Gurdwara finding out, oh, and flying all mental health again. The word mental health in our community is such a taboo. It's quite difficult to address for some people. Just talking about mental health or going to a mental health department in a hospital can be quite a big moment for an individual. And actually, who in this world wants to be classified as mentally unstable? How many people are here are comfortable saying, I've got an issue? Whereas stats prove 90% of people living in London have a mental issue that is either resolved or ongoing individually. So 90% of the people in this room will have suffered some sort of mental issue or suffering a mental issue going forward, but it will probably not be addressed.
So Vijay, with that in mind, how do we actually bring forward the discussion about mental health issues when, as I mentioned, there's no Punjabi word for depression, and there's it's basically considered that this is something that is rarely addressed within the Punjabi community. So how do we bring that discussion forward within Sikh spheres?
It's already, even my family, people could refer to me as the Pagal the doctor, and doctor who works with Pagal. But first of all, I'm not a doctor, I'm a counselling psychotherapist. But it just comes to understanding, could be our older generation have come from India and various parts and come back to UK, and we kind of, it's been one of those things like, just go with it, man up, just deal with it. And that dealing with it is quite dangerous, because we're not dealing with it, we're hiding away from it. And when we hide away from certain things, they always crop up at the times when you don't want to do it. I work quite closely in domestic violence. In our community, there's quite a lot of domestic violence going on, alcoholic abuse, in terms of mental health. But what we tend to do is not actually deal with the issue. And it's like our state of denial rather than exploring it. And even if you go to Gurdwara, we don't get the support needed because there's not enough professional people there who are facilitating the way to deal with it. We're quite quick to give answers, but we're very, very slow at listening to actually what the people want to say and how they want to say it. And sometimes it's taking that time, taking the effort to actually listen to someone. They can listen to the duk, listen to where they're coming from. Some people don't want answers, they just want to be heard.
So the first place to be would be connecting with others, and as Vijay just said, sometimes people just want to be heard rather than be provided with a specific answer. Bringing the same question though to Baljit Singh, I'm going to reference an article written by Dinesh Pugra and Gurvinda Kalra. Does Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj describe depression? And in this article, which you can Google and find online, the idea of duk as pain is not a reference to physical pain, but more of a reference to suffering, a mental pain. So with that in mind, is actually depression and mental health issues, Baljit Singh, something that is described within Sikhi, if not within the Punjabi community?
So that's obviously two different things there. The word depression, how is it described within the Punjabi community? As it stands at present, there isn't an actual specific word that can be used for the likes of my parents' generation that don't speak any English to actually use one specific word to say this is what depression is. That's something that we still need to work on, and we need to look forward on that. But what does Guru Granth Sahib Ji Patsha Ji say? So our Guru very often in Gurbani uses a word chinda or chinta, which is more closely translated to anxiety, and it doesn't actually refer to what people think. When Guru Sahib Ji is referring to chinda, they're actually not referring to just general worry, because that is very different to suffering with anxiety, and anxiety is a mental health issue, which in Gurbani, Maharaj actually talk about it in the perspective of mental health about 140 times that word is mentioned. And it might come to a surprise, but what we've got to understand is most of Gurbani, a very high percentage of Gurbani, is actually what we call Mananu Sambodhan Karke, is actually talking to our mind. So throughout Gurbani it's saying, "E man meria, oh my mind." So Kabir Ji is even saying that the whole purpose of us being in here and who is our dealing with, and saying our whole dealing is with our mind. So the word in Gurbani is chinda for anxiety, and yes, the word duk is referring to an actual suffering of the mind, which is again mentioned again and again through Gurbani. And it's even Guru Nanak Dev Ji is giving wisdom to a doctor and is explaining to a doctor the different types of duk that you can have and the different types of suffering one goes through, which only one of those, and which is like, I think the fourth one down, is the suffering of the body. which isn't given that much relevance in Gurbani, but the first one, and they give a description of what the different types of pain are. So what we need to do moving forward is kind of educating the Sangat and creating a word taken from Gurbani to say what is that word going to be to educate our Punjabi community. And that's not something we can decide now on a panel, but it's something that definitely needs to be looked into.
So there might not be a Punjabi word for depression, but there's definitely descriptions of depression-like symptoms within Gurbani. By the way, guys, I should have mentioned this is a very open forum discussion. So any participation from the audience, please just simply raise your hand. We've got a roaming mic there that will pass over. If there's anything that you want to add or contribute, simply literally raise your hand. Just looking at the same question. Oh, we do have a contribution here.
Having spoken to many psychiatrists and whatnot, and many therapists and whatnot, I appreciate and understand there's a massive difference between being diagnosed with a mental health disorder, illness, and worry, too much worrying, too much low mood, low sort of feeling, going through a difficult patch, stuff like that. You can't, to me, I cannot, and I don't think the psychiatrists and therapists that I've met regard that as mental health. That is just having a low mood or going through a difficult patch, which people will deal with as time goes on. So say sort of that everyone's sort of suffered sort of some sort of mental health problem in their time, is a bit too much. And I think it allows everyone to believe that, mental health is something, we're all gonna, which to me in the Punjabi word is sadai. That is the word that is used in Punjabi for people who actually sort of like go down that road where they're going a bit loopy or whatever, or they don't sort of feel and they can't find it. The word is sadai, not pagal. Pagal is hardly ever used in Punjab, to be honest. But sadai is the main word that people use. And it's just, to me, there is a massive difference. And the thing is, the Western culture is learning between the differences between the two. But I appreciate at this moment in time we're looking at what we're going to do with the Sikh community and get out of that focus where everyone's going to be called a Sadai.
Yeah, do you mind if I take that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're really right there. In mental health, we use this lingo to basically classify a group of symptoms. So the symptoms that a lot of people experience, which we generally call depression, which isn't actually right because it's too casually used. We actually mean low mood. So when we say somebody's depressed, you're right, they may not be clinically depressed. Depressed is quite a heavy word, and it means that it's been going on for a long time. It means that other things, associated symptoms, are involved, not just simply a low mood. And everything like that in mental health is like on a spectrum. So I guess the closest that I kind of hear people say in mental health is that mera dil udas hega, मैं थोड़ी जी उदास हैगी हैं, मैं दुखी हैगी हैं, those kind of things. That's the closest that you get. But then do I call that depression? No.
I don't know.
No. So there are other things that we have to take into account to call it depression. And we have to be very careful about that because our culture is using these terms really, really casually now, to the point where everybody's got an issue: depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, he's a bit schiz, those kind of things, which isn't politically correct.
Just opening that question up a bit, do you think there's a notion then that Punjabis shouldn't actually suffer with these issues, or going even deeper, that actually the Sikh community shouldn't, because bearing in mind notions of Chardi Kala, or if you are practicing Sikhi properly, that these issues shouldn't affect you?
Look, I think, is that to me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I think everybody deserves to be in high spirits, which we call Chardi Kala, and that is ultimately the aim. We all want everybody to experience that. So if somebody's not in Chardi Kala, we want to help them as much as we can. It doesn't mean that we are not allowed to be less than Chardi Kala. We're all human, and then we're lucky enough to be Sikh. So our Guru Granth Sahib Ji has given us a way to experience Chardi Kala, so we should be very grateful for that. It's actually prescribed. So we should ultimately get to that state, but it doesn't mean that we don't, we can't be in low mood. I think that's quite human, isn't it?
To Sandeep Kaur, how would you say, as a family therapy associate, the family relationship within the Punjabi Sikh community kind of affects discussions of depression, especially going back to the original question, that there might not be an actual specific word for it, or at least one that people recognize unless they're studying Gurbani?
I don't think they do. I personally don't think they do, and I don't think that they really understand what mental health is. And I just wanted to go back to Benji's comment. I think there's a lot thinking about low mood that might be sort of associated with other things, like, for example, domestic violence, or there might be, things like rape. There might be learning difficulties, and those are closely associated with mental health. So I guess those things in itself can be quite stigmatizing, and people don't want to open up about those things. So it might not necessarily be about the mental health. It might be about thinking about how do we open up conversations about that. And families don't. I guess it's hard. I guess a woman wouldn't necessarily, if there is domestic violence, she wouldn't be opening up conversations with her husband that, I'm feeling low, I'm feeling depressed. You want to hide that,
Jaspal Kaur, as a psychiatric nurse that's also done work within the Sikh community, do you think that there's sometimes an issue that we use Sikhi as more of a barrier than as an aid to dealing with mental health issues? As a barrier, where sometimes it's just an easy prescription to give?
I don't think, in the truest sense of Sikhi, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
But what I do think is that it's really interesting that there isn't I know that you mentioned there is this particular word, but not a well-known common word or a common thought towards mental health until more recently. And I think that says something about the whole construct of psychiatry, and it's Western, really, isn't it? And I think we're kind of catching on and trying to fit our own culture and our own religious beliefs in some sort of context which isn't necessarily for us. It might not fit and it might not be relevant. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned Dinesh Bugra. They've done a lot of research in thinking about how to create a language in a religious context which makes sense to more people, so it is accessible. But at the moment, the way we work in this country, using terms like depression, using terms like schizophrenia, it is a Western construct. So thinking about Sikhi and using the word, could it be a barrier? Like I said, in the truest sense, I don't think it is. But the Punjabi community and Sikhi, to me, are separate. So I think how it should be addressed within the community is warranted, to think about that spectrum. So mental ill health does not just suddenly appear. There is that spectrum that you mentioned, Benji, which I agree with. So you've got your health, and say, for example, the opposite is ill health. How do you keep yourself healthy, and how do you keep yourself away from that low mood going into a depressive state? Because that's how it starts. And I think to think about the actual final diagnosis and label and that kind of context, we need to be thinking very early on about these low moods, these periods of anxiety, or kind of starting on the phase of hallucinating, things like that. Just it's kind of at the origins, to start there and then go on and use everything that we have in our community, including Sikhi.
Perfect.
Sorry, excuse me. Right, but there was a massive problem that we faced in terms of our own backgrounds, is we're living in a Western culture. We've got two factors in our lives, unless people live either one, which is one is a cultural life and the other one's a Sikhi life. But most of the people, not necessarily in this room, most of the people out there in the world will live both. Joined together, they're living with Indian, Punjabi rituals, or whichever rituals they wish to live with, and also living with the Punjabis or the Sikh rituals as well. And having the two go together, and then when you're sitting with the psychiatrist and you try and explain to them, what it is you're going through and what the difficulties you're facing, the psychiatrist or the therapist might say, well, forget that then, forget that side of it then. But that might be one of your basic beliefs, or some of the things that your own parents or your own brothers believe in so hardly. So to give that up is very difficult. You are literally, what you're looking at is breaking families up just for one person to be happy. And that's the problems that we face in our own Sikh communities, because we are literally trying to fight two sides and trying to get to one goal. But the problem is we've got so many different obstacles in the way.
So there definitely seems to be kind of a cultural bridge needed to connect how we deal with mental health and Sikhi, from what it seems. Just before we move on to the next question, I was actually going to ask you, Gurjan Singh, sorry, we'll come to questions in the audience. Please pass the mic upon our so we can get to the panel first. So just asking Gurjan Singh, how do people actually communicate their mental health issues when they're calling up the Sikh helpline? What kind of terminology would they use, or how would they actually describe their experiences?
The short answer is they don't really.
Oh wow.
What would often happen is, so just to lay down sort of the foundation and the structure of the Sikh helpline. So Sikh helpline was set up a number of years ago in the Midlands by Gyani Sukha Singh, very involved with youth organisations and youth camps, and then they found out that there's a much needed support. There's a need for a support network outside of the Gurdwara demographic and a little bit more private and personal help that a lot of people need. So what would happen is someone would ring the central phone number, and that person would say, okay, which area are you living in? And then that would get allocated to whoever's the lead for that particular area. So London, Bradford, Birmingham is about as far as we are so far. And then we have a conversation with them. So we'd call up and say, you know, what's on your mind? We take down notes. A lot of the time it's either getting them to open up, or it just generally comes gushing out what the root of the problem, what they think the root of the problem is, and then you kind of have to have a few conversations with them just to in a lot of the medical industry you have what's called like eliciting history and symptoms. Find out what's gone on before, find out what's happening now, and that tells you a big way what you're going to do going forward. And it's a lot of the time there's this common themes of denial, of brushing things under the carpet, shame. There's a very interesting point that our Baisab here raised, which was the language we use. Now, all of my life, the term Sadai to me has always meant idiot. Yeah? And quite often we misuse certain words.
Sorry, just very quickly, how many people agree with that? That when they've heard the term Sadai previously, that it hasn't meant what has been described here and is more closer to idiot. So we've got, pretty much the majority of the room there. This is really interesting. Sorry, carry on.
And that tells us about our general backgrounds and how common certain things would be. So shame is another sensation. We know, we've called you because we want this to remain anonymous, and so many times, obviously for us it's implicit, and same with everyone on the panel here within the trades that they do and the service they provide to the community. But it's I want this problem solved, but I can't possibly have anyone know about it, and that then it's so multifaceted. Another point that was raised was, there's two battles. There's the cultural side and there's the religious side. There's so many more. There's the community side. There's the internal one. There's the professional one. There's the one that, you could be, a person could be suffering from bipolar disorder, and they could have one person in their life that only ever sees them when they're on a low. They have another person that only ever sees them on a high. And these things are so complex and so multifaceted that it takes years and years of study or experience to understand. But a person who's maybe not very well educated, not got a good way with words, their life is, I wake up, I get the kids ready, I get my husband's food ready, I clean the house, I make roti, and I am sad and I don't know why, because I'm doing everything I thought I was supposed to do. And I don't understand why my husband beats me and why my daughter got raped. I don't understand. It's there's so many different angles to this, and this is where, as a community, so to bring it back to sort of the community question, as where we are as a community is what do the Sikh community do? What does the Sikh helpline do? Not enough. not enough. I'm sad to say.
So just before we move on to the next question, we'll take two more audience participants. So they're at the back. Just at the back, no.
Right at the back.
Back, yeah. Set his hand up from the start, and then we'll come to Banji in the middle.
Sorry. So this is two questions. Sorry. First question is, what is the definition of mental health, as you guys know it? And the second question is, how do we recognize mental health within someone else? And how do we deal with it?
So with the first question, I think we'll go to Dr. Ravjot Kaur. How do we define mental health?
Yeah. So mental illness or mental health, mental illness is basically when you've got an enduring life-interrupting pain that doesn't allow you to function in society. So you can't, you are holding on to some mental pain, something that we can't see as easily as physical pain. And it's starting to affect your life on a daily basis. So it may affect your relationships with your parents or your partner in marriage, your children, and it starts affecting work to the point where you can't, you're not going to work, so you socially can't function. That's when it kind of develops into a mental
So it'd
illness.
be something debilitating then that's happening to you mentally. The second part of the question was, is there anything that we can recognize to spot a mental health issue? I'd bring that to Herbal.
With mental health issue, most of it's quite hidden, quite withdrawn. Quite a lot of the people I work with, when they go through certain bouts of mental illness, they get withdrawn from themselves, they get withdrawn from the family, withdrawn from there isn't a checklist to say that you can say, oh, this person's got this person's got this is how it is. Unfortunately, when you deal with people's health, especially physical, mental health, which is not physically you can see, there is no right or wrong answer. It comes down to a number of things. Things like, is the person sleeping quite well? Is the person eating quite well? Is the person drinking? There is no direct checklist, but sometimes there are some sort of telltale signs that a person can look out for to say there might be something that needs to be explored. And in our community, we don't explore, we diagnose. And that is one of the key things I do with people is, okay, I've been noticing for the last couple of days you've not combed your hair. Is everything all right? Or is there something you're not eating properly? Is there something you don't tell me? Is it you've been bullied at school? Is there something at work? Could it be something as simple as that? Or could there be something more? But you give the opportunity to the individual to explore and say, actually, I've got this problem. I don't know what to do. Or thank you for actually taking the time out to listen to what I'm saying. Because most of the times, most of these issues that we have may not be mental, but there are issues that they have. And sometimes by just talking it through, by expressing it out, by letting it out in ether, we're allowing someone to, in a way, become their own therapist, actually work through what issues they've got, allowing them to actually breathe again. And that's quite difficult nowadays, is breathing, because nowadays quite a lot of people get suffocated within their own bodies because they don't know what to do.
Before we can move on, because it's just good to get some clarification as well. So from what Veerji's saying is about looking out for signs, how do we know, okay, this seems like a sign where somebody's going through that. But what we've got to ask the question now is to ourselves, at which point then, and through which avenue do we get that message out to the Sikh community or the Sangat of to look out that even that is a sign? Because at what point do you even feel that you need to be educated on that? Because if somebody's living a nice cushy life and nothing's going wrong in their life, why are they going to even feel the need to know about signs of mental health? So, but now we know that it's becoming an epidemic, it's becoming so common. So what we need to start thinking of on a Bantic level is that even if somebody is suffering or not suffering, we still need to get that awareness and education out there through whatever means it may be, through our Sikh channels or social media, to start kind of almost programming into people's minds to say, this is a sign, this is a sign, these are typical signs. At least that way they think, oh, I read that was there. and when they can then start recognizing that within their family household, even though all these signs are mentioned in Gurbani, but we're not able to tap into Gurbani enough, so then we need to look at other means.
Sorry, so we're going to move on to the next question, but Banji, do you have
I think my points are more 2 points of clarification.
Yep.
The first point is that you talked, I think a lot has been mentioned about domestic violence against women and rape, and that comes up a lot when speaking about things that happen sometimes in the Sikh community. And general low mood was also mentioned a couple of times in relation to rape and domestic violence, and I think it's important to recognise that PTSD, clinical depression, anxiety, panic attacks are all recognised medical issues that can come from rape and domestic violence. It's not just a general low mood. I think also you mentioned about sort of being your own therapist, sort of self therapy, and sort of recognising someone's hair might be out of place and calling that out and sort of saying, are you being bullied at school? And that's sort of a parent-child relationship in that situation. The reality is that if a child is going through bullying at school or is suffering, they're not going to react to their parent calling them out and saying, are you being bullied? Yes, Mum, I am. They start chatting away about it. It's very unlikely that's going to happen. I think what's really important in Sikh families and the communities is that parents are open and keep an open dialogue throughout the child's upbringing, not just when they see some hair out of place or whatever, you know. I think what's really important is recognising that parents aren't therapists and they can't always step in and help, and they need to recognise that just as you would go to a doctor for your body, you know, an optician for your eyes, going to counselling for children and their mind is a really important thing, and to recognise when an expert has to step in. It should be something that parents are told about rather than potentially hounding their children. And I also think, as was mentioned by the gentleman in the front, the cultural aspect and the issues that creates in terms of mental health means that the people that you're going to turn to might be part of the narrative that you're having a problem with. So they are the contributors to your mental health, and they are, you know, maybe making it worse, and they're part of the storyline, in which case you can't turn to them. And so when your parent turns to you and say, what's going on, you can't tell them that actually I'm really struggling with the sort of stress of being part of this community sometimes. And parents don't necessarily recognise that, especially if they're older generations. So I think these are sorts of things, I don't know if anyone in the room has ever had this with their kids, or if, you know, younger people have had this with people that they would usually turn to, but they can't because, like I said, they're part of the narrative. These are just points.
We're going to get to a question about what the Sikh community can do more of in order to facilitate those discussions. But just trying to get quite a few topics covered with this. We're going to move on to the second question, which we're going to first put to the panel. But again, any contributions, put your hands up. But we are first going to go to the panel. So the second question of tonight is, what are Sikh organisations currently doing in regards to mental health issues? Gajan Singh, you've already given us a breakdown of what the Sikh helpline do. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Because as far as I'm aware, when you're talking about specifically dealing with mental health issues, there's not many organisations that are specifically dealing with that issue. If anyone does know of others, please raise your hand. I'm going to go through a list of other groups and individuals that do this within the Sikh community. But before we do that, do you have anything more to add about what Sikh Helpline are currently doing in regards to mental health issues and connecting with the Sikh community?
The focus on mental health has been something that's been probably for the last 6 months to the last year. The first stage is training the volunteers, teaching those that are going to go out and engage with the community as to, you know, how to integrate with this, safeguarding, putting in a few protocols, which initially I thought, oh come on, let's just go out and do it. But actually you realise that people within your team, not everyone has the same skill set, so it's preparing everyone in that capacity. Then it's a case of, well, open the phone lines and wait for the calls to come in, and that's kind of where we are. So someone will phone and we'll allocate someone to them, and sometimes it becomes a bit more informal. I'll spend maybe 2 or 3 visits with a family or an individual, and I'll think, okay, I now know where we are roughly. Let's find the appropriate person to delegate to you. Let's get you into some formal therapy. You know, if it's a case of you've got an addiction to something and you want to go away somewhere and spend time in a place where you can just get away from the addiction, facilitating that. So most of what we're doing at the minute is facilitating between the person who is suffering it to making someone who's surviving it, and it's being that gateway between the two, because I'm not a mental health expert, but by no stretch of the imagination, but it's a case of I'm lucky enough to know a few people in those industries, and
that you can direct them
towards.
Just Bal Call, so I know you've done quite a lot of work with different Sikh organisations in dealing with mental health issues. Do you want to expand on what organisations are doing work in this area?
Yeah, I think a lot of organisations it feels like, and maybe this is my ignorance in it, but it feels like a little bit more recently have been speaking about things, have been using the terms mental health, mental ill health. And I've done a little bit of work where I think it feels like perhaps a risk was taken in not a lot of people know much about art psychotherapy and using art as a mode of expression in a less threatening way. And I think one of the organisations that I worked with, Khalsa Aid, they were able to sort of tap into that and think, okay, we'll go with it, not knowing anything about it, but thinking, how can this be helpful? So that was interesting to see it's picking up. But I think as a general sort of feel, it feels like it's in its infancy. And it's really interesting, Benji, how you noticed about the mentioning of the low mood, because it actually feels, and maybe this is not sort of correct of me to say so, but it feels like that part of things, so maybe like the top layer of saying, okay, this is low mood and anxiety, is able to be somewhat, absorbed. Anything a bit deeper and a bit more sort of a bit more difficult and challenging and not known. And we do work with the unknown. That's as professionals within this, that you can't ever truly know as much as you have training and experience. You're relying on that interaction, that human interaction. So I think when you're bearing all of that in mind, it's not any wonder that actually our community and Sikh charities find it difficult to get into that messy, the real, the depth, that kind of grey area. Like, how do you go about it? How do you start that conversation? And how do you then move forward when you're in it? Because it's frightening. It can be frightening for not only the person experiencing it, but, in the trust that is being placed in you as a professional to try and walk you through that. And I think as Sikh charities, they're picking up on it, they're thinking about it, but we have to be careful that it doesn't become a trend at that level. Yeah. And we actually, it's this thing, we're going to do a mental health thing. I think we need to get a bit deeper into it.
Yeah, essentially there might be quite a few groups doing surface level work, but doing the actual deeper things there aren't many examples of. But I'm just quickly going to go through an example of some of the individuals and organizations that are doing work in this area. Before I do, just from the audience, how many of you could name more than, let's say, 2 organizations within the Sikh community that are working in the area of mental health? Hands up if you can name more than 2. Just one person out of every, 2. So not many people know, but I'm going to go through a quick list now. Firstly, Harjinder Singh of Akal Publishers, one of the most respected Sikh educators in the country, is quite open in detailing his own issues growing up in a family where there's mental health issues. He's said that for sufferers of mental health and their carers, the pervasiveness of helplessness and lack of understanding determine their experiences. And he says that our community holds honor higher than health and well-being in his own experiences. There is a Banji called Ripaljeet Kaur who's based in Leeds. She does quite a lot of work in the area of dementia. She runs workshops and awareness lessons in the Punjabi Sikh community at schools and gurdwaras. Sikh Youth UK do a lot of work in areas of addiction and dealing with people that have suffered sexual abuse. and they provide support through a Sikh ethos and also through Sangat. So it's bringing them into their own kind of community. Support is both for the individual and for the family, providing them with coping mechanisms through things like Simran and Seva. Simran being meditation, if you will, and Seva being a way to kind of get involved in something else that might take their focus elsewhere. Nanak Naam are an educational organisation run by Satpal Singh. He describes them as a charity dedicated to educating people on a holistic approach to mental wellness as well as mantra mindfulness. There is Hope and Compassion run by Manpreet Kaur, an organisation that have recently done a Gurdwara tour around the Midlands. They do a lot of work for special needs children. Galeen Manku works for AS Mentoring, who is specifically looking to do an event aimed at the Sikh community about helping people with autism lead a normal life. She specifically works for an organisation which helped to get people suffering with autism into employment. The Sikh Education Council, they've been running events on mental health since the autumn of 2016. We were hoping they would provide one of their pamphlets, which actually has an article on the neurochemistry of depression written by Dr. Palwinder Kaur Manda. I don't think we have any here, but they might turn up, you never know. But they've been doing work on facilitating discussion in mental health for over a year now. Jasvinder Rai, based in Derby, is a former alcoholic, now clean for 9 years, that does a lot of amazing work tackling addiction, which is a big issue within the community. He's actually presented before the UN, and he does regular workshops at Gurdwaras around the Midlands. Rani Bilku of Jina International in Slough provides counselling for members of the Black and Asian minority ethnic community, and specifically holds counselling for female victims of crime, given that they do a lot of work for immigrants that might have been exploited on their journeys towards coming to this country. SWAT, the group most known for their Langar Seva, they do a scheme where they provide company for people in care homes, usually elderly people. This has been defined as a mental health professional as psychosocial intervention. And in general, many of the Langar Seva organizations come across people, usually the homeless, with mental health issues, and they just try and deal with them with compassion. Is this enough? Should there be another branch that they can use for these guys to get more help? That's something that we can discuss now. But I'd just like to open it up to the audience, because I've named about 7 different individuals and organizations that do work in this area, and only 2 people were aware of any work in this area. So I'd just like to hear from you guys, if you could pass the mic to...
Yeah, there's us as
Do you want to introduce? Yeah, exactly.
Us as well. We're British Sikh Nurses. We're a fairly new organisation since April. I'm a children's nurse, the only Sikh children's nurse, British Sikh children's nurse for the last 20 years. I'm also a senior lecturer at ARU in Cambridge, and I do adolescent care. We recently actually got together with Voicing CSA, and we're dealing with children from sexual abuse and those who have suffered sexual abuse, and going with them with their mental health as well, and supporting them with their mental health. We've also got together with Mandy Singera, who's a UN, who's huge, absolutely huge. So I'm one of her mentees as well. So we're actually going global with her as well. I've actually gone global as well in terms of Sikh communities, and gone out to villages in India, and we've taught hand washing, the basic needs of hand washing, just coming out of the toilet just to wash your hands. It's massive. We're also working with Binti, an organisation that works with wives that are, really been downtrodden by husbands as well. So, we have a scope. We really do. I sincerely think we have a scope. We have a scope for especially our young generation. And when I've come across the young generation in terms of young adolescents and young children and adolescents, and along with Sikh societies within universities, such as ARU, Cambridge University, I'm with them, quite a few. There's quite a huge initiative within the youngsters to really open up and get some awareness. So it isn't just as much as it should be that our parents don't know. And actually, really thinking about it, we are second generation. You know, I'm second generation. Our children are far more open to come to us than what would have been our, you know, our parents and etc. I wouldn't have gone to my mum and dad, certainly not. But certainly children will come to us in terms of our age. So it is beginning to open up. It's a very small hole at the moment, but it is slowly widening. And I think with the contribution of so many organisations such as SWAT and everyone, I think this will widen even further. And the perspective is huge to get this really going in terms of mental health.
So Vijay, sorry, could you just also say where people can follow your work if they want to get in touch?
You can certainly follow my work. Just wear the t-shirt. I'll put the t-shirt, so follow the t-shirt, and I'll hand out cards if you need it as well. So certainly follow. We have 16,500 followers so far on Twitter and 32,000 followers on Facebook. And majority of our Facebook followers are from Punjab and India, and it's huge. It has gone huge since April just this year. And you know, there's a lot of youngsters out there that just need tapping in and just need a hand. That's all it is.
Do you focus on, building like emotional resilience?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I mean, down to mental health, what we think about are the three things. The real crux of mental health is thinking, behaviour, any altered thinking, any altered behaviour, and communication. And that's what you're looking at with that child. The child that's just been not talking to you, the child that's not talking to you, the child that doesn't forgets to eat, doesn't eat, and they lose control. And we're working now with Cambridgeshire in terms of their adolescent unit, and we're working closely with them as well, looking at you know, eating disorders and etc. as well, because that's huge within the Asian female population, and it's not seen. It's not seen. The last control they have is what they put in their mouth. They lose every other control in their terms of their life, but the only control they have is what they put down their mouth, and they stop at that point. And that's what's sad to see.
Yeah, we're just going to let Gajan Singh interact, but I just want to re-emphasize the point, guys. Only 2 people raised their hands when I asked if anyone knows more than 2 organizations that or individuals that work within this area, within the Sikh community. So I think we need to look around and ask ourselves, are we actually doing enough to engage with those that are working in these areas to give them the support that they need to take it further? We'll hear from Gajan Singh, and then I'm actually going to pass the microphone back to Sharanjit Singh, who's going to talk about a project that he's running, which is in this the field of mental health. But sorry.
There's a very important point you've raised, which is just about all the organisations that you've mentioned, they all started with like a small focus, and as they've expanded, you know, as that hole got a little bit bigger, it's a bit more light, and the path gets a bit clearer, and it expands, and the path gets a bit clearer, and that is kind of a big take-home message for everyone, because a lot of the time, you know, we're talking about some very deep, very ingrained and disturbing situations here, but sometimes you think, you know what, I can't help someone with that. I could help someone with this. I don't mind going into an elderly care home and spending time with someone. I can do that. We are all, not everyone here can do everything, but everyone can do something. Yeah, and that's a really important point, because with the organisation that our brother has mentioned, is all of them started off small, and all of them started with a small team, and we're so lucky. And if you use social media strategically in the right way, even if you don't really know what you're doing, it just comes to you, right? These things expand, and more and more people will come to you for help, and more people will come to help. And that is how we are a Sangat. That is how we are a community. That's how we are a Qawm. That we realize that, you know, we are capable of doing something. Another sort of side issue, I'm an Anglia Ruskin alumni myself, going back about 7 or 8 years. And back then we'd started off the Sikh society, when we were told, oh, there's not much scope for it. Now it's flourishing, you know, and there's a lot of Sikh societies within the university spheres, which is such a great battleground for open discussions, because a generation now there's more open talks. You know, as a sister at the back mentioned, you know, the conversations between first and second generation Punjabis and second and third generation Punjabis, they're different. I'd like to think that we are now focusing more on emotional intelligence, but building these skills. It's going to take time, but in the community we have it, and today's been a great platform to highlight how many skills we have amongst each other, and now it becomes a type that we're running out of excuses.
Yeah. So we're gonna pass the mic to Sharanjit Singh over there, who's running his own new project, and if you could tell us a bit more about what you're doing.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name's Sharanjit Singh. I'm a 22-year-old student here in the UK. First, I'd like to say thank you to Sikh PA and the panel members and also the audience for having and facilitating, such a fantastic conversation already that's hugely needed within our community. So we've had loads of questions, and a lot of you might be thinking, how can we help? What can we do, say, straight after this? How can we help in the longer term? I run a social media campaign at the moment called Tarakki. Tarakki is designed to shape a society in which Punjabi men can speak openly about mental health. I'm looking to collect and share the mental health experiences of Punjabi Sikh men, taking them out of the private, out of the family, and into a public where people can see, people can read, and people can know the people who have been infected by mental health, these mental health issues. What I look for is Punjabi Sikh men who want to share any of their difficulties with mental health. For example, I went through quite bad social anxiety when I was doing my undergrad, and I noticed that these discussions weren't being had in the public, and we've mentioned before that there is a distinct cultural difficulty with discussing mental health issues outside of, say, the family or outside of a private space. So what I want to do is change this culture, and be that through, say, social media in the short term. We're on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and at the moment what we're doing is showing Punjabi men that they can speak about mental health. This isn't something that's reserved for a certain type of person, but it's something that we're all able to engage with and should be allowed to do so without judgment. What I'm looking for particularly, as you may have gathered, are Punjabi Sikh men willing to talk about their mental health, their experiences with mental health, and how they feel the community has both empowered but also restricted their abilities to come to terms with what's happened to them. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Tarakki is spelled Taraki. And I've also got an email address for anyone who wants to get in contact. It's submission@tarakki.uk. But I'm also available afterwards if anyone wants to have a conversation. And being a full-time student myself, what I am aiming to do is bring this conversation to light within the Punjabi male Sikh community. It's not that I don't feel there's an issue in the wider community, but I'm one person. I'm taking on a small chunk of it, and I'm going to try and make a difference in any way I can. Because I believe that, as we've said, the younger people are the key to this, but we can't forget the older generation, who still have so much to offer in this discussion. And I'm hoping that I can kind of bring people together to take down a culture that really seeks to restrict us and damage ourselves, our community and our families.
So once again, guys, if you want to know more about organizations like what was just described to you, any of the ones I've mentioned, please do get in contact through any means, whether it's through social media, have a word with one of us afterwards. We're happy to kind of share details and promote the work of the Sikh individuals and organizations that are working within the mental health sphere. We're going to take just one more audience participation on this, and then we'll move to the next question. So Banji, if you want to.
Yes, I'd just like to give just food for thought. I'm a health practitioner and I do acupuncture, and I've treated children from the age of 5 years old to the elderly up to 80 years old. And time again, the victims have said there's a lot of prejudice. So I think we need to, as a Sikhi, not only focus on this mental health and depression, whether it's mental or physical, but we need to also educate the people that are the so-called norm society within the Sikh community, because the victims, whether it's depression or the whole umbrella that comes under mental health, the victims would openly come out much more if the prejudice was broken down. Now you've got the older generation, which is still, they're set in their ways. But if we could also aim at looking at how are we going to break down the prejudice for the victims. So
it's definitely an area of focus, yeah.
Community,
And
whether it be in the Gurdwaras education, we need to educate and focus more on the society that is the normal, because that would help the victims. Because my patients say time and again, from children to adults, if half the problem is educating the people that are causing them the stress.
so we do have a question that will look at active steps that the Sikh community can take to deal with mental health issues.
Just to add on to that point, what really stuck out for me as you were speaking was when you said so-called normal. And to highlight so-called normal, actually Gurbani does the same thing. So most of us and a lot of us that do kind of put ourselves in that category of being that so-called normal, Gurbani actually says that Jojo dise so rogi. So Guru's actually saying that wherever I'm looking, I actually see everyone to be diseased. And so Gurbani talks on a level of speaking of when somebody is so taken over by this little bubble, this little world that they live in of ego, and from that ego stems when their certain energies and emotions get out of control, whether it be anger or whatever else. But not very often in our communities, somebody that is finding it difficult to get a grip of anger, for example, looks at that as being an issue, or actually it being even closely related to that's something that could lead to a mental breakdown. But Gurbani does recognize that. And how you highlighted that to say the so-called normal people, and from my very recent experiences of something I've personally gone through, and a lot of the times that the people that are put in the box of being normal, in the way they react to someone that is going through a situation and anxiety, actually they don't know how to deal with it, and it's because they're fighting with so many demons within their own self, so they're actually not got a clear picture of life anyway. And so my whole perspective of sitting here is, out of collecting everything from here from today, is looking for a forward active step that we can take from here. And just again, when Virji here went through a list to say, actually, there is so much in place. Why don't we know that? And why don't we recognize that? There's a reason for that. Because if we look at Virji here, what they're doing is more specific and is more targeted and is working more with youth, adolescents. But all of these other organizations, they're doing great work, but that's not necessarily the main focus of work. So I'm not going to pick up the phone and go to the likes of some of these organizations, because I know they also deal with this case, that case, and so again, when we think of that as a Sikh helpline, so for us when we're trying to look for answers, okay, so where do you kind of pass that work on to? So what seems like is lacking is there's not actually one Sikh organization that is dealing with this head on when it's just mental health. So it's got to get to a point where somebody does reach out to Sikh Helpline, does reach out to Sikh Youth Birmingham, but then they say, actually, we've got a Sikh organisation that deals with this. And that's why these aren't recognised yet, because they are doing so many different types of work.
That's a good point. All right, we're going to move on to the next question, the third question of the night. It's quite a important question, actually, and before we move on to the panel, I'd actually like to ask the audience, what mental health issues most impact the Sikh community? Again, what mental health issues most impact the Sikh community? I'd just like to get a kind of rough scope here. How many people here personally know someone from within the Sikh community that suffers with addiction? If you just look around, you'll see like the massive majority again. Now, I'm going to pass on that question to firstly Sandeep Kaur. So in your experiences working within this, again, you know, addiction has been something that's been brought forward to us as an issue that needs discussion. But what mental health issues most impact the Sikh community from your perspective?
So I guess from my perspective, I guess depression is one of the common diagnosis, or people come with that. But like I was saying earlier, it's associated with domestic violence. So and that's quite interesting because in the social care context, the way sort of domestic violence might be seen in the Indian community is very different, actually, how Western community sees it and how the Indian community sees it. So I guess from an Indian perspective, it might be seen as being overly strict. I guess showing discipline, but actually that might mean something else in the Western sort of way of thinking. And I guess in terms of thinking about mental illness and domestic violence, it's hard for men where there might be domestic violence to open up about loss or feeling emotion. Men don't do emotions, so I guess that's quite stigmatizing in itself. So it's about how do we start having those conversations with men to be able to open up about what's been going on. I think another common thing that I often deal with is that a lot of parents, they come with children who might present with behavioural problems, and that actually might be more associated with mental health problems. But a lot of the families don't recognise that because, depression or anxiety isn't something that you think of. You think, oh, munda ladaka hai, So it's about having, I guess, those conversations with parents and thinking about, what else could be going on. I'm just trying to think about other things that...
What we'll pass on to Ravjot Kaur. You work in West London as a psychiatrist. West London has a massive Sikh community. So in your experiences, what mental health issues most impact the Sikh community?
See, mental illness, it doesn't discriminate, but in the Sikh community, it can be kind of divided into age specific. So in our children, we have got the common things such as bullying, depression, anxiety issues, conduct disorder, which is kind of getting involved with the police and getting into trouble basically. We have emerging schizophrenia in children, that's coming about, eating disorders, feeling suicidal, self-harm, identity crisis.
So Benja, at this point, can I just ask you to maybe cover for the audience here as well that the different types, so like as in, I think that's very important for us to understand and to be educated on. So normally we'll just say depression, but obviously we know there's so many different types. So we've got OCD, we've got autism, and we've got health anxiety, we've got so many different variations of mental health.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I'm looking at this question, I'm thinking what mental health issues, so what would be maybe more predominant, and just to go through a little bit of the differences of intrusive thoughts, OCD, these disorders and what they are, just to give that education. This is going out live for people to understand the different types.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, but if we keep it simple with depression, for example, like Baiju said earlier, you have got low mood. So low mood is a symptom of depression, but then you have got other associating symptoms as well, such as problem with your sleep. A child may be presenting as sleeping too much or sleeping too little. They may present with poor concentration at school, weight gain, weight loss, starting to become isolated. So there are different symptoms that we look at and then kind of call it depression. Same with the other disorders that we classify for our benefit, really, to see where that person is. So that's kind of a session for another day, I think. That's in children. In adults, again, you've got the same sort of things. Again, you've got depression, identity crisis, especially people coming from abroad. We all are at some point, aren't we? So we have kind of cultural issues integrating. We have this is a new, well, not new one, but one that we're starting to talk about, which our aunties and uncles are talking about, which is, sade bacche vyah nahi karde pe. That's causing a massive amount of anxiety. It's actually causing into anxiety and depression. So those kind of ones are coming through. Another one that I would like to just touch on is cancer. So health-related mental health diseases is a big one. We're not used to it. We're not familiar with it. So it's causing a lot of depression. Financial problems, addictions again, and in the elderly, things such as dementia, that's a big one. And again, depression coming in, perinatal problems with mothers who are having children, just about to have children. That's a big problem.
Just passing on to Herbal, you mentioned earlier that sometimes you're described as the Bagaldar doctor. When people are saying this, what do they expect you to be dealing with specifically?
Well, mostly it's family and friends and people in the community, and especially when I go to the Gurdwara, it's like Bagaldar doctor kind of thing, and it's a joke.
Yeah.
It's taken as a big joke. It's taken, for some people, it's being as a less of occupation or less demeaning. So not only are they demeaning mental health, they mean demeaning mental health professionals. So it's like ha 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 ha, tu pagal laga, etc., etc., etc. So that stigma comes onto it.
Do you think that actually stops people recognizing genuine issues of mental health within the Sikh community?
In terms of recognizing, if I was an accountant, a lawyer, or a businessman, my order would be slightly higher than it is at this present moment. Not to say that mental health professionals are not respected, but in terms of the hierarchy of things, my son is a doctor, my son is an accountant, my son is a lawyer, is a more of a bigger factor nowadays than my son helps other people through their issues that they have. And coming from my own personal perspective, I don't see many Sikh people in my region. It may be due to demographics, maybe due to location, but as a professional, very, very rarely do I see Sikh men. Might see a Sikh woman once in a while, but off the records, I get phone calls coming from a number of locations. It goes, Herbal, I need to talk to you about this. Herbal, I've got this problem. Herbal, my family member's got it. Or classic, my friend has got this. What can I do? And and it starts off with my friend is this, but as soon as you work through those barriers of actually what's going on, you realise it's not the friend, it's the person you're talking to. But even when that taboo comes to it, I'm going to briefly touch on to something that's I'm doing quite a lot with, is working with men, especially those who go through the use addiction. Addiction for me is a big problem in our community. Alcohol. I talk to my male counterparts and they go to me, Herbal, you don't drink alcohol? I go, no. She goes, I went to a Sikh Punjabi wedding and there's more alcohol on the table than there's Coke. And I'm like, well...
How many people have heard that then, that general assumption?
And nothing, it's one of the things, we're trying to fit into the Western world, and the image that we created of the Western world is basically, we just like having a jolly. Before this used to be the Irish. It's like Irish people are this. Now the Asian community is coming into it. Addiction is a big thing because sometimes addiction is the last resort for some people, especially for men. Men tend not to get treated, they tend to get punished. In our community, going forward, not a lot of men talk. They're meant to be the head of the family, they're meant to be the kartar darta of the family, and even when things like bereavement, if you see a man cry in a Gurdwara, that's it. There's something wrong with him. So in our community, actually being a male, talking about your emotions is quite difficult. So people will turn to alternative things, alcohol being one of them. Alcohol allows them to actually escape from it, drugs being another one. Allows them to escape from actually the reality of what's going on for that moment in time, for them to actually go from there. And people tend to forget to escape, and that's what's nowadays mental health is becoming an escape from reality.
Just before we pass on to the audience, if we hear from groups that, individuals that do serve in the area of mental health, what is kind of commonly brought to you guys, firstly Gajan Singh with the Sikh helpline, in terms of Sikhs talking about mental health issues that they're suffering with?
Loneliness and isolation is a big thing. Wow. So the common thing of, my husband's passed away, or my wife's passed away, the kids have gone off to uni, and I don't know what to do with myself. You could argue that's not a Sikh specific problem, but we're so engrossed in not talking about our problems, the things that our common neighbours in our community may feel quite comfortable talking to someone about, we keep it within ourselves. Other problems that we don't, because as an Indian community, we're scared of death. The word death, you don't talk about it, and children shouldn't go to funerals, and when you go to a dead person's house, you have to do XYZ rituals, allegedly, and we're scared of death, and we have the fear of death put into us. And then when there's a bereavement, when someone close to us has died, we don't know how to deal with it. Yet, from a Sikhi perspective, we embrace death, because death is just another part of life. And it's understanding that what the Sikhi teaches, we become so disconnected to what our Sikhi teachings are, that is not always, but often part of the problem of part of the problems that we have. It's a disconnection. So I go to the Gurudwara all the time. I was like, yeah, but what have you learned? I don't know, I just go because I was told to go. So ritualism is a big problem. Another thing one of the audience members touched on was the issues we have with society. It's we go to places to hear things, we don't go to listen.
Good point.
And that makes us a bit weaker. And another a big issue that comes up is, I don't think it's not so much here, but we talk about like male mental health issues. Suicide. Yeah, I mean the ratio for male suicide compared to female suicide, I don't know the statistics, I'm sure.
Which is the age of 25 and 40 is its highest suicide. It's highest form of death.
Yeah.
So just to clarify what BG said, there's the highest form of death in male from the ages of
25 to 40.
From 25 to 40. But what I want to add to that is one thing that it's overlooked a lot is, because the question here again I'm clarifying is that what mental health issues most impact the Sikh community. So that is also talking about where some of these are coming from. And what we want to do here is today we don't want this to just be another event. And then start looking forward to what's the next event now. And so what we want to do is empower each other and the Sikh community out there. So one thing where things like mental health is occurring from. So even within Sikhs, as young children growing up, there's been a lot of sexual abuse that's taken place as well by close cousins or relatives. And often that isn't actually expressed and shared until a lot later in life. And when they actually understand what happened to them by a close relative or a cousin that they're still associating with and their family still associating with, and maybe 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, when they kind of realize, oh, you know what, I think this is what happened to me, and they sometimes they'll express that to their families and parents, and their parents are like, well, we can't do anything, that was your taida munda, and we actually can't say anything to them, I can't upset your taya. And then that child is living with that, knowing that their parents aren't going to take a step. They feel too guilty and ashamed to bring it out. They don't know how to approach that person. Do they want to go down the line and the route of getting the police involved? So there's a lot of these cases, more than we realize. And the more we start digging into people, the more this will actually come out. And this is another big reason for why mental health is occurring. That's just one of many things that are happening. So what we need to do is now, looking forward from this, is creating a platform and empowering people to say how we can deal with these type of cases too, and what help are we going to provide? Because as a Panth, we are very powerful, and I really feel that, you know, even if there's a little bit less money spent on marble for Gurdwara, and I don't think we need £1 million or £17 million spent on Gurdwara. What we need is more structures and charities set up that can have got enough professionals employed to be able to specifically deal with these cases, but based off Gurbani. So what we don't want to do is sidestep from Gurbani and what Gurbani is saying. So we don't want it to be that somebody called Sikh Helpline, and the only option they've got is to go to a professional that works for NHS. I'm not talking down at them, but I'm saying they've got plenty of clients that are going to come to them from the widest community. But as a Panth, if we've apparently got the biggest jewel is Gurbani, if we can't tap into that and find the actual the way mental health works from Gurbani, we can't keep just like a parrot style keep chanting the words, our Bani's got everything, our Bani's got everything, but we've got nothing in place. We've got no structure in place if you're having a breakdown, but even though most of Gurbani is talking about your mind. So we've got to now think of what we're going to build for this, and how we're going to actually help our community be empowered to speak about it. They're only going to speak about it if they know we've got a solution for them. But if we're just going to pass them pillar to post, actually try that organisation, actually try that one, or just go back to your doctor. So we've actually failed them then.
So a running theme here seems to be that whilst we can kind of guess really what mental health issues most impact the Sikh community, we'll never really know until we create means for real dialogue in this issue. If anyone else from the audience would like to make a contribution.
I'm a psychologist by trade, and often I get the same story, which is, can you just do some psychology with them? And I think other people might have heard this too. Can you sort it out for us? So when I bounce it back, that actually, and what we've talked about today is actually a wider thing. The community, the kind of Western systems, pathologizing language. I think people don't like being held accountable to that.
When you say people, are we talking all of us within the Sikh community, or also within the mental health industry?
Yeah, all of us. Okay. Because some people do like the power of being an expert, and you know, I could be like, yeah, I can sort it out, I've got magic powers, but I haven't, and that's the main thing. So my question is, kind of, we could think of one point to take away today, and I know I have one, but I was just wondering what the panel thought, if you wanted to sort of, the audience to take away one point.
I think that would be a great thing to do at the end of the event. So if you can remember to ensure that we do address that at the end of the event with the last question, that would be great. So not to kind of discuss that, but we'll definitely get to that at the end, so everyone can kind of bear in mind one thing to take away from this. We're actually going to move on to the fourth question now, rather than take any more from the audience. So that is, what role, if any, can Sikhi itself play in dealing with mental health issues? Again, that is, what role, if any, can Sikhi itself play in dealing with mental health issues? This is in relation to things that are known as beneficial to mental health issues, like meditation, like having a positive community support around you, and things of that nature. We'll first off actually start with Baljit Singh. If you would like to address what we can do in regards to Sikhi itself, what role it can play in dealing with mental health issues.
I still feel that we've not done enough work and not tapped into Gurbani enough to actually look at how to deal with different cases of mental health and how to deal with them. So generally, soon as you come across someone in the community and they're not going down the route of taking professional help, one of the things that will be said to them is to seva karya kar, okay? Go and wash the dish at the Gurdwara, or, you know, and all these things, yes, they will be of aid and they will help to some extent, but before that step is taken, still there's that initial step to be taken where that person is assessed and looked at what they're actually experiencing. Because what can happen is, what a lot of the families will try and do is, because they can't cope with them, they'll say just keep him busy, and everyone will keep saying inu busy rakho, keep him busy. Okay, so what they could be doing is that they're in a gurdwara set up and they just left there with no one to understand them, and they could be washing the dishes there for 6 hours a day, but their thoughts are still running 100 miles per hour. So they've actually not switched off at all. So if somebody is actually experiencing intrusive thoughts where they can't get a grip of their thoughts and they're constantly living in the past, we've not even assessed them to say at what level help do they need. Is it going to be community work, sending them out with the likes of our brothers and sisters of SWAT and helping out there and saving to the community? Yes. So for one set of person, that might be the forward. But and then what you'll often get is Bani padya kar. But if anybody's actually gone through that motion of, like I said, having your mind taken over by intense thoughts, you can't actually focus and read. So I know, and our professionals will know this, and when somebody goes through CBT, that when they fill out a questionnaire, one of the questions will be, are you still able to read? And because your actually mind gets to a point when you're not able to read anything anymore. So we're just throwing people out and we're becoming those experts and saying, God, but we don't know what their problem is yet. So if they can't even read Gurbani because they've gone too far, and so that's not the solution for them anymore, but there might be someone that it's not reached that level yet, so they might be able to, yes, tap into Gurbani and then read it mindfully and contemplate on the words. So there's many things when we talk about, okay, what is in Gurbani? In Gurbani there are something called Jugtiyan, and Jugti means a way of doing something. And Gurbani will tell us, somebody says to you, Naam japya kar, go and recite God's name. So do you know that you can actually start reciting God's name, but your thoughts may still not stop? So your actual Simran, what we call Simran, could be what your thoughts are. So what you're actually thinking of, because Simran means remembrance. Your remembrance still might be what you've just gone through, what your trauma you've just experienced for the last 5 years, but your tongue's saying Waheguru. So we're doing, the job's being half done. And that's why, for me, the solution is what we're going to talk about in the fifth question. And that's what we need to look at then. We need to assess people where they're at and what actually is needed for them. And yes, definitely the answers are there to help mental health for what the gurus have provided, and whether that be through seva or whether that be through reciting Naam. But there's a methodology of even how to recite Naam within Gurbani. So Gurbani talks about Gaviye Suniye Man Rakhiye Pao, which means you have to actually be mindful of even the word you're saying. So if you're not, it won't have the same effect. So if you're even not listening back to the name you're reciting, your focus won't be there. So you're not going to be able to get a grip of your mind. And if you are able to follow the system that is in Gurbani, then yes, you will be able to things will start to work. So what I'm saying is, it can't just be, it's got to be sat down on a Bantik level, and which isn't out of reach for us. We've got professionals here that have Sikh background, and Guru Sahib's given me the platform to work with an organisation to have some form of understanding of Gurbani. We could actually collectively sit together and make a program according to Gurbani and what has been already discovered of the mind in the Western field, and but it's only things like Gurbani that will tap into and telling you straight there's a link between the likes of gossip and anxiety. But which professional is going to tell you that? They're not. Because like I said, I've been through personal experiences. I've been to professionals. No professional actually sat me down and said, Baljit Singh, tu kate gap shap ta nahi launa jahdi. But my guru does. And we forget that mera bad guru Gobinda that my guru actually is the biggest doctor of all doctors, and he's actually the creator of the mind. He's the creator of compassion, but he's the creator of jealousy as well. So he knows exactly what affects the mind, and the Gurbani's first question gives us the answer to dealing with mental health. The first question in Gurbani is how do I break that veil that is dividing me and with my creator? And Gurbani says that hukm rajai chalana, which basically means that you live in acceptance and you take his will to be sweet. So the first thing is, when we live in non-acceptance, that's where everything starts to fall apart. Where we're not able to accept something of the past, what will happen is there'll be a rage, there'll be anger. From anger, there'll be frustration, but these are very high energy emotions. Anger can't last very long, and that will turn into sadness eventually. At this point, it still won't be picked up, because anger is not looked upon as, oh, mental health, but it's come from non-acceptance. And then eventually, when sadness goes on for long enough, those low moods, it will turn into depression. But then really, if you look at it, really, and this is someone that's experienced something, and I'm still got the confidence to say that really then that's an illusion, because the problem sits there, was the non-acceptance. We got to get back to there, and that was the first question and answer and solution in Gurbani. So everything's got to be worked around that. So that's the looking forward.
So I think what we're getting from that is that Sikhi can play a role with structure and with guidance from mental health professionals. I want to open it up to the audience before I hear from our other panelists. Does anyone here have experiences, whether positive or negative, of how Sikhi has played a role?
For so long.
Which one?
Vijay's wanted to say something like that.
So if we could pass the mic to Vijay. So if anyone would like to detail their own experiences of how Sikhi has either, or somebody's advice from within the Sikh community has either negatively or positively helped you deal with a mental health issue.
So I wasn't going to answer that question, but I was just going to make another couple of points if I can. So I think you touched upon how we could help people, and you talked about them doing seva and simran. But what would you do in a scenario where they're not self-accepting, or they don't realise that they've got a problem themselves? And how would you try and help that person, if you like?
I think, Vijay, sorry just to kind of butt in there, but I think everyone here has held their hands up that at the minute there isn't those structures, and part of this is implementing those structures. So I do feel that we've kind of addressed that, and just looking,
That was that the initial assessment needs to take place. So first recognizing that somebody isn't even willing to use those avenues to be worked on, or those might not be an option for that person because of how the severity of their mind at that point. So again, that's something that needs to be worked on and structured to say, so if we've got that scenario, then what is the avenue for that? What is the avenue for that? And what is the avenue for that?
But even prior to that is just to kind of be approachable, be non-judgmental. These are the things that are real barriers in our community right now. The judgments is a really big one, isn't it? So being judgmental, being humble, dropping the ego, listening, not just hearing, and being approachable. You know, just kind of being loving,
I think
warm.
you're absolutely right. And the other point I wanted to make was I'm a governor of a Sikh faith school, and I hear about these problems every day from our own community, and it's a huge problem. So I think for you to set up the structure is really good, but a good place to have some of these discussions would be in some of these schools as well.
Yeah, of course.
When putting those in place.
Just echoing on your point made before, I get to see loads of people, and we work in relationships, we work on an individual basis. And I can probably echo with some people who say, I can't work with someone who doesn't want to work with me. Unfortunately, my magic wand is out of its batteries, and it's going to have. There is no physical. You can sit in front of the best therapist in the world, but if you're determined for it not to work, it's not going to work. And likewise, you've got to have the understanding that you want it to work for it to work. Whether that be sitting in front of a Western therapist or sitting with a pracharak talking about Gurbani. You have to have that emphasis to believe in what you're doing is actually going to help you. Otherwise, you're just going through a rat race.
There is a certain thing that we could do. When what you mentioned, it reminded me of how we deal with that at work, and thinking about how we're interacting with people. And I suppose we have this thing where you talk about insight and how much insight and how much willingness does the person in front of you in a therapeutic situation have. And sometimes there isn't that. And I think one kind of like maybe one small step towards managing that is you being able to accept them in their non-accepting state, however they are, for you to accept it. And something which we talk about a lot is holding someone's hope. So when someone isn't able to do that and they are in a difficult place, and you can see maybe a little bit more of a sort of holistic picture than they are able to, then for you to be that person, to be able to hold that.
Yeah, that they deserve to live. If they're suicidal, for example, they're completely hopeless and they've tried all methods.
Sorry, just with
I want to add to this. This is 1
as
minute.
quick as you can.
Very quickly, to add to that, so from what you're saying and what Benji said as well, so even if they're not willing to work, but sometimes, the person that's sitting in front of them has got such a positive aura about them, and that positiveness, something I've experienced when I've been at my absolute lowest, when I thought it's too late, there's no hope and there's no forward, and I can't work with anyone because it's too late. But I've still had somebody sit in front of me saying that I believe in you, you are going to do this and you are amazing. And you know what, because the way our senses work, something goes in, whether it sits consciously or subconsciously, that seed starts to get planted of positivity. And from my experience of having such a powerful being say this to me, it was literally from saying it's over, the next day saying, you know what, maybe I can do something.
So I think from that we can take that even without the structures in place, which are they're not in place right now, there are still things that can be done. Just in regards to the school, I think you got your answer right in front of you, VG. This is why we did this event, so you can learn more. And the British Sikh Nurses Group, Rohit, I hope you can have a discussion and you can take that forward. VG, if you will, and pass on. And I think, Banji, did you have your hand up as well? So if we could ensure we keep them as quick as possible. We don't want to keep you guys here until 10 p.m. But yeah, VG first and then to Banji. Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh.
Just want to first of all thank SikhPA for hosting this event. It's kind of two questions, but I promise I'll make it.
Yeah.
The first one, adding on to VG, just adding on to that point. Obviously, educating kids is definitely needed. I think we're quite fortunate in the sense that we've got social media, we're able to absorb a lot of this information on. For the older generation, obviously, my dad's not on Facebook or anything like that, so to educate him, I feel like the best avenue might have to just be the good borough. What about with regards to kids? Obviously, opening this question to the panel, what is the age? In the sense, when is a kid old enough to speak about mental health issues?
That's a very good question.
In the sense that, we don't want in the situation where 1 + 1 = 4, and you're driving your kid home from school and they're going, Dad, I think I've got depression. And you're like, no, son, I don't think you do.
That's a very good question. And
just a second question, if I can, is that obviously in your background in Sikhi, whether you're part of the religion or you practice it yourself or just part of Sikh heritage, how have you found that has helped you in the careers which you've taken on today? And do you feel that Sikhi can really benefit people non-faith, as in the teachings and the history with regards to the religion?
So I'm going to have to assign these questions to ensure we get through them as quick as possible. With the first one, if Sandeep Kaur, if you could expand, because obviously as a family therapy associate, you probably have that conversation.
I think we tend to underestimate children, just how much they understand, and I think children know a lot more than we actually think they do. And naturally, as parents or families, we're very protective, and we don't want to open up these conversations with our children, because I guess you might be worried about how they're going to see you as a parent. Are they going to feel like you can look after them, and so forth. To be honest, it really, really depends. It could be anything up to, children I work with, 5 or 6, know that their parents have a mental health problem.
Just to add, I think the thing is it can be at any age, as you say, 5, 6, but the crux of it is when that child is able to rationalise their behaviour and rationalise their thoughts. From, as you know, with development theories as well, 0 to 4, they're not going to be able to rationalise their behaviour. It's a classic situation would be if, you pose a question to a child like, my dad's gone into, your mum's half died with cancer, your dad's gone into the pharmacy, he's robbed the pharmacy, he's come back out, what are you going to do? A child at 3 or 4 will say, dad's done wrong, dad's done wrong. But if you get to 7 or 8, they'll be able to rationalise that behaviour and say, hold on a second, he's done it for a reason. And there's a reason why he's done it.
So do you think there is a difference?
There is, in terms of looking at from an analytical point of view, perspective in terms of theory, there is from a theoretical perspective, as well as just watching children in terms of observational, in terms of behaviour. Certainly, when they get to a point of rationalisation of their behaviour, which can happen from the age of 5 or 6 above, or 7 to above, they're able then to take in what they're thinking about, and you're able to then just make them think and be aware of what they're doing.
But I also think it depends on some families where children might be much younger carers, have sort of where parents haven't been able to look after themselves, so they've started to take that role on very much earlier on. So I think it really just depends. It really depends.
Moving on to the next question, we'll hear from Dr. Ravjot Kaur and Harpal Singh as a psychiatrist and as a psychotherapist. I think they'd be best placed to answer how Sikhi has helped them in their careers and understanding of mental health.
My work is tough. It's not very pleasant sometimes, and being on the Sikhi path has really given me strength. It's given me strength to find out more about myself, my guru, and then also allowed me to do seva much more compassionately, because that was something that I was losing. I kind of graduated, became a doctor, knew I didn't want to be a surgeon, went through the method of elimination, and I really wanted to do something that would help. However, there was an obstruction with myself as well. So then I went for the plunge, and with Maharaj SikhPA, I was blessed with Amrit, and that I found has helped me. I'm getting there slowly, but it's allowed me to be a lot more resilient and a lot more honestly loving, openly emotional, because those are the things that we want to feel on our spiritual journey to meet Rabb. So those are really important, and I guess the way that I'm doing it is by learning how to do that with people in this world.
I think that's a fantastic and clear answer. I don't know how you're going to try and match that, but if you could, Harpal Singh.
She's more senior than I, so good. In therapy, you've got to be empathetic, you've got to be non-judgmental, you've got to be open, you've got to be accepting, you've got to be congruent. That is just psychological interventions that we do. Where did I find that in my Sikhi? Bhai Kanhaiya Ji. Bhai Kanhaiya Ji was actually in the battles, used to take a mashak, which is a goat-skinned flask, and used to go give water to those who were injured. He didn't care if it was friend or foe, enemy or friend. It was literally, I see my guru in you, I will help you. That was an inspiration for me to actually work with people, becoming that therapist, becoming that non-judgmental person, becoming that person that goes, anyone can come to me for their problems, I can work with them. And that was probably my biggest source of inspiration. Until this date now, the virtues of Bhai Kanhaiya Ji have still resonated with me. And even going on now, when I get to a stage where I can't do this, what would my guru do? Where would my Sikhi allow me to? What will Bhai Kanhaiya Ji do at that time when this person needs help? Will I just shy away, or will I go out of the way and not only give him the water, but when Guruji gave him those bandages and medication to give to them, it's going above and beyond what is required.
Well, I think you did really well to match. Yeah, if you could do
so basically,
very quickly.
There's a doctor that now works with our organisation, does a lot of seva for basics of Sikhi and does talks in schools, Miranveer Singh. So he's a frontline doctor for A&E. And so he's saying, so when he got into it first, and whoever would come into A&E, whether they're suffering with intense, they're having panic attacks, or a lot of people come in due to anxiety as well. So he'd say that he'd treat them as anyone else. They're a patient, they're a number, and you go through the procedure. But then some magic happened to him. He came across an amazing YouTube channel called Basics of Sikhi. So, and then something happened, he's kept his gears, and it's complete. Even though he's got all that training, he's gone through his old doctorate and stuff, but then he said it completely changed the way he was looking at those patients. And no longer was just a patient, it was another fellow human being, just like Guru Nanak Dev Ji says that, I Panti Sagal Jamati, they're from my class, they're my class of people, another human being walking in. And he said before he'd say, all right, quick, it's just another number, write him this medication, get him out of here. But he says most of them now don't need medication. He goes, I'll spend half an hour talking to them from the videos and what he's learned and his connection with Gurbani. And he goes, a lot of them just walk out with a smile now. So this is how it's actually Sikhi is helping people in their professional lives as well.
He does actually have some videos, I believe, testimonial online of how Basics of Sikhi has influenced his career. If you go on the YouTube channel, perhaps they'll share that straight afterwards. We're going to actually have to move on to the next question. We're going to spend around 20 minutes on the last question, going 15 minutes above 8:30. Hopefully not passing anyone's bedtime and you can all stay up. All right, so the last question is probably the most pertinent question. What active steps can the Sikh community take to deal with mental health issues as a community? So again, what active steps can the Sikh community take to deal with mental health issues as a community? The first person I want to address this is Jaspal Kaur, who again, you've done seva with various organizations. How do you think this can kind of be stepped up and perhaps even formalized into something that will see the Sikh community deal with the mental health issues in a more progressive fashion?
I think it has been really insightful in hearing from everyone today, because it feels like there is that thought in everyone's minds as to how to do it and then how to physically and practically start something. And I think it goes sort of hand in hand, so that practicality as well as the being non-judgmental and being approachable. I do think there should be a little bit more focus on some sort of physical presence in gurdwaras to make it feel like more of a community sense.
Just very quickly, how many of you would agree that you feel your gurdwaras should have something in structure where Sangat can visit and get some sort of mental health use? So pretty much everyone here.
What I wanted to go back to, although it's kind of like not answering the question but answering the question, is that you mentioned very briefly perinatal psychiatry and the age at which we should be talking about this with our children. I'm currently quite blessed to be working in perinatal psychiatry, and it's been really eye-opening in terms of thinking about our role my role in the community, but also thinking about how women and men experience that whole process. And I think if we were able to sort of tap into things at that early stage where we're thinking about where people are looking to have families and start families and think about even preconception. I know it sounds funny, but if we think about depression and or anxiety or whatever mental illness and how we hold it in our bodies, if you go on to start a family, you're taking that imprint of something into a family without really being conscious of it. So I'm thinking, if we were able to speak to people who are thinking about starting families, how they're thinking about that, bringing that child into love, into Sikhi if that's what's wanted, and then moving forward into having those conversations which create empathy naturally. So a child at 5 or 6, you're absolutely right, there's stages of development that you wouldn't be able to talk to them necessarily in a fully understanding way, but empathy is created a long time before that. In terms of a newborn, as soon as they can see, you start to create empathy by that maternal bond or that attachment, which then creates a strong foundation for everything else to be able to be spoken about. So if we're able to go right back and think about these early things in setting up things in gurdwaras where we could even have clinics around mental health, but clinics around families and children and their mental health. I think that would be amazing. I think.
Before I pass that question on to Gurjan Singh, I actually want to touch on other forms of dealing with mental health issues, because I know you have some experience in art for therapy, for example. So does everything need to be in the form of a clinic, which can kind of be intimidating, or counselling, or do you want to expand on how things like art for therapy can actually be put in place? Because I know Guru Nanak Gurdwara Smedic actually used to have, I don't think it's a weekly thing anymore, but a weekly program which was called Art for Therapy every weekend. So if you want to expand on that and how that can help.
Yeah, so there's art therapy and being an art therapist, and then there is using the arts as something therapeutic. So there's the profession and the whole sort of medical studied side, using stages of early development, looking at sort of, like I said, the more psychiatric side. And then there are things which we use day in, day out, which I have used from when I was young to be able to cope, to be able to manage in my own ways of expressing. And it's kind of linked to Sikhi. When I paint or draw the gurus, I feel even more connected on a very subconscious level. So I think going into the profession now as an art therapist, it's been really interesting to see how it is non-judgmental. So asking somebody to sit opposite you and tell you their kind of life history is a little bit intimidating, and you don't often have the words, something which I identify with, because I find verbal expression a lot harder than doing a drawing or doing some art form. So having that person in front of you and using a creative outlet, whether it's art therapy, music therapy, drama, but something that's outside of the talking, like I said, it uses layers of yourself which are not able to be communicated. You cannot put everything into words. And what art therapy does is it starts working on those things which you are not conscious of. So sitting with somebody, for example, in looking at the deficits and the gaps, it's interesting that you were saying there's not actually something specific for our community. I started something earlier in the year thinking about specifically using art therapy with our community. It just doesn't exist. There isn't anything within art therapy that says this is how you kind of look towards other cultures. I'm not trying to plug what I'm doing, but I'm just genuinely saying there's gaps. And if these can be brought into mainstream sort of thinking, they may be helpful. And I think to value it as being a profession. So art therapy is not just, we're just going to do a bit of colouring, this is a bit of a waste of time and money. It has a lot of power and a lot of, like I said, a lot of adaptability to work with any age range.
Now, with that in mind, actually, again, before I pass on to Gurjan Singh, not to delay, could we get some input from anyone who would like to actually contribute, whether on the panel or in the audience? Are there other forms of dealing with mental health issues, or at least aiding them through things like sport or dietary advice, or just other outside of the box areas? If you'd like to.
Different level, I've actually just done some research with World Snooker, and it's been published as well. And so, snooker is one point where my publication was done, and our research was done with over 2,000 applicants, 2,000 participants, and it showed actually concentration and levels of concentration, levels of just putting yourself in another situation, and sport in itself actually makes a major attribution towards positive mental health. And it was very, very positive. So
these kind of sporting structures set up within the Sikh community and being more open would actually, in your opinion and from what you've studied, literally benefit us tackling mental health issues. In general,
sport will just generally be positive for mental health.
Banji, sorry, in the middle, if you want to pass the mic on.
So if you just encourage all your Gurdwara to get a snooker table.
Health and fitness.
Yeah.
For me, it's pretty much, I don't sort of have an alternative therapy that people can use. Perhaps writing is something that can really benefit people.
Great point.
If sometimes you can't talk to people, but you can put it down on paper and just read it back to yourself, maybe that can help. But on a simpler level, I think this is a very personal experience, is to stop discriminating. I think, I personally think the conflict within me is I don't understand how, if the Sikh community don't stop discriminating amongst people, how help somebody with mental health.
That's the first barrier, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that, and it's very similar to what this lady on my right said.
I guess the question is, how do we overcome that in the first instance? And I know that a lot of people point to events like this and projects being set up like what VG Sharanjit Singh's project that will open up the discussion. But is there anything else that people think that needs to be brought up? Mandy shot her hand up very quickly in the corner. Sorry, making the mic.
In just in response to what you're saying, one of the first things that I think we can all really make an effort in is challenging situations. So for instance, you have so many people in the community where we say, or do you know what, don't worry about her, she's just had a little baby, or she's just off the rocks a little bit. I think if we all just turn around and support the person that comment is being made at and said, well actually, are you okay? Or in any kind of social scenario, I think that's really important. Yeah, so I think just standing up for somebody and turning around and saying, actually, are you okay? Rather than just having these very surface level Punjabi comments is really important. Just something that I did want to add, it's interesting how Sikh PA began, because it was probably about 6 months before we really sat down and decided that we're launching Sikh PA.
Sorry, just this is Rupinder Kaur, the co-founder of the Sikh Press Association with Jagraj Singh.
So about 6 months prior to that, I've suffered from depression for a number of years. And about 6 months before then, I actually had probably one of my worst breakdowns ever. And it was at the time I'd met Jagraj Singh, who came up with this idea, and he said, look, we need a situation for the Sikh community, but we don't know how to do it. My background is as a publicist, and I kept saying to him, we can't do this. I don't have the mental capacity. I'm in a really bad state. I can't do this. I don't want to do it. And it was just small steps, and it was the first time that anyone from the Sikh community actually recognised, hold on, this is really an issue. And he gave me kind of very small steps to kind of look at Simran, look at Naam Japna, just small things that kind of really helped me out of it. In terms of, I know, just going back to some things that the panel said, talking to family or openly actually having the nerve to say, look, I'm not feeling so great and these are situations and I'm suffering from anxiety. The feedback that I got from my family, my parents, was do not tell anybody that you have a mental illness, because they will take your children away from you. All of these crazy notions that not one person within the Sikh community or my family really backed me up until this happened. So in terms of kind of coming out of that, is what Vijay said, finding people that are open, have no judgment, and will happily kind of show you that path, for me, into Sikhi and Seva. That really helped, and look at us now, we're having this whole big discussion.
Vijay, can I just add one thing to that, which I really want to mention in this group, is basically we get stuck sometimes because of our mental health and the people who are around us. Not saying that your company is bad or anything, but that has a massive influence on how we feel and how we think. So it's interesting how you said by Jagraj Singh came and entered your life in that way. I mean, it's important to seek higher thinking individuals, whatever that means to you. We know a lot of people now in our Sikh community, and just simply to ask for a guide is nothing to be ashamed of, because then what you're doing is you're coming out of that cycle that you keep repeating, and that illness that you're creating in your mind. Sometimes somebody can simply just snap you out of it. So I just want to say, please do continue seeking higher thinking individuals.
I agree with that, but just to add to that, it wasn't. That was the starting point, but it's the people that he then surrounds himself with.
Exactly.
So Vijay's not going to like me saying this, but Harinder Baji there, I'd call and break down his phone sometimes, like, listen, this is going through my head, I need to talk to somebody.
So you meet new Sangat that way?
Yeah, and that's it.
And it re-emphasizes the importance of Sangat.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to bring it back actually to the original question. So what active steps can we take as a community to deal with mental health issues? I think what we take from that is, as Banji said, the higher thinking individuals. Also, Banji, you did mention that you yourself are looking to put something in place that you wanted to expand on.
Yeah, I think it's basically it's called Sikh Sense, and it is a first basically a signposting service, you could say, because there's so many ways that we can help ourselves at the beginning to prevent being seen by somebody like myself. I really don't want to see you, and I don't, by the time that people come to see me, their mental health illness is really established. It's probably far gone, and sometimes I don't like it, but I will have to prescribe medications to get them to a state whereby they can function in society. Bearing in mind the side effects that they're going to experience. That's the reality of it. So if people can engage with so many, I mean, we all learn in different ways, don't we? So some people like structural based things, courses. I'm aware of people who do mindfulness courses. Some people really hold on to Naam, Simran, Bani. So somebody telling them to do 1 Japji Sahib, 5 Japji Sahibs, increasing that to 1 Sukhmani Sahib might just do the trick for them. Somebody engaging with CBT, integrating
CBT, sorry, just for those who don't know.
Baji probably do a better job than me.
CBT is cognitive behavioural